I'm Maryn.
And I'm Christie.
And you're listening to Hung,
a podcast where we talk about true crime from the court of law to the court of public opinion.
Okay, so when you first introduced the idea of this podcast to me, I was really intrigued. I mean, I've known you obviously for a long time.
Your whole life?
My whole life, yeah. But since I've been able to notice and process those kinds of things, you always were interested in crime-related things. Not criminally minded, but
right.
And I liked to watch the things that you watched. So you were watching a crime drama, I wanted to watch a crime drama. You were watching Bones, I wanted to watch Bones, and Dad wasn't super happy about it because he didn't like me watching Bones.
True.
But in the last couple of years, I myself have gotten pretty into true crime and true crime podcasts. And it was never really something that I noticed that you had a particular interest in. I think it was generally usually fictional crime.
Yes, I think that sometimes, though, I would watch true crime documentaries on TV that would have, they're usually shorter types of documentaries. And actually, that's really kind of what brings us here today. How did we end up here doing a podcast together? It was watching a documentary, The Sins of Our Mother, or whatever that one was called, on Lori Vallow Daybell. And that was years back. And actually at that time, there was still a lot of information that they didn't know. But it was crazy because of growing up Mormon, the Mormon connection, some of the fringe beliefs that led into their crimes and set them up to commit the crimes that they did, that it just really was fascinating to me. So as she did go to trial for the murder of her 2 children, the murder of her now husband's wife, I was watching. And there was so much evidence that was brought out in that trial. Kids buried in the backyard, they're dismembered, burned. It's obvious that this is a crime. So when they had the additional trials for Lori in Arizona, those were cases that were not talked about much because it was her 4th husband. It was actually the first murder in the series. So they didn't have the background of all these other deaths having occurred. It is debatable. They do suggest that perhaps she did kill her 3rd husband as well. I can't remember which. Charles was 4th. But, that's still, no charges were ever brought on that. And it's unclear if that really is true. But, so I followed the Arizona trial very closely. I watched every single day of testimony and ended up going down and sitting in every day of court for her 2nd Arizona trial, which it was for the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux. And what struck me in that first Arizona case for Charles Vallow was how little came into court. The jurors that were sitting on that case, they did not know about the deaths of her 2 children. They did not know about the death of her 5th husband's wife. They didn't know that she'd already been convicted of those crimes, and none of that could be brought in. And they actually kept very limited the doomsday cult type of ideas that were in there. They kept that very minimal and I think really tried to simplify the case, but it made me nervous. Thinking about, if this is all I knew, if this is all I heard, would I come back with a guilty verdict? Especially, there's this blonde, cute, bubbly Mormon mom. Mm-hmm. And would I just be more likely to give her the benefit of the doubt? Well, it probably wasn't. And I'm sure it was actually self-defense and they didn't set this up to kill him. And I was very nervous that they would come back with a not guilty verdict on that. And realizing that once they stepped out of that courthouse, they were going to find out that she killed her kids. She was involved in the murder of her current husband's wife. And how would you feel in that situation? Mm-hmm. So that got me kind of thinking about what's it like sitting on that side. Mm-hmm. And what if I only knew what they knew? Mm-hmm. What conclusion would I come to?
Yeah, it's something that I have never really thought about because I've always been exposed to the whole narrative, or at the very least the narrative that's presented to me. And most of the time it doesn't really feel like there's any sort of question about it. Specifically in the cases where a jury ends up acquitting or a jury ends up coming back and deciding that someone is guilty when it seems clear that it wasn't them, it feels really easy to judge and be angry and not understand why that could possibly be. So I think the idea is really interesting, even for me, to see it from the perspective of somebody whose character that I know and who has only been exposed, like we said, to the same information that a jury has been exposed to. In some cases, I could question people's prejudices or stereotypes or things like that. But because I know you, that's not really a question. So it really would be, for me, interesting to hear what you think just purely based on the information that was provided.
Right.
If you really felt like there was enough to convict or enough to acquit.
Right. So I came to Maryn and approached her with this idea. I'm going to need a teammate. I need somebody to work with me on this, because what I really am setting out to do is, like we've been talking about, learn about a case, only listening to what jurors heard during the trial, nothing that was talked about outside of the presence of the jury, nothing that made it into the media, no other opinions whatsoever, and come to my verdict based on what I hear, and also not even knowing what verdict the jury came to in that case would be the ideal, that I don't even know if I'm in agreement with their verdict or not. But then I need the next part, which is the stepping outside of the courtroom and finding out all the stuff that I didn't know, mm-hmm. and that I did not take into account when I came to that verdict. So what made you interested in deciding that you wanted to be the second half of this podcast duo?
The idea of doing a true crime podcast was always kind of interesting to me. In fact, my little sister, I suggested it to her at one point, but it never came to fruition at all. And which is kind of a good thing. I mean, I probably could have convinced her to like true crime, but it's not really something that she's ever had an interest in on her own. So I'm more like, she likes me, but I don't know.
You can pretty much get her to do anything. Let's be honest here.
She's got more boundaries now, but
yeah.
I like true crime. I like you, and I like creating, and sometimes it's a struggle to find something creative that doesn't also have a negative feeling associated with it, or that's not necessarily enjoyable in and of itself. So I don't end up keeping up with it. Right. Especially if it's creating online. But would I have a lot of fun talking to myself on a podcast if nobody listened? Probably not. But I have a lot of fun talking to you about true crime stuff. Let me tell you, we have been researching a specific case for probably a month or so now. And every time we're together, we're just like, we hardly contain ourselves.
Yes, we want to talk about it so badly. And we have, like,
snippets.
We have, but then we say, no, we can't talk about it until we're ready to record, because I want to keep it pure, and I don't want to end up being influenced, and I also don't want to, I don't want to learn things, and I also, some of the things I want Maryn's just organic response to, right, when you hear my viewpoint on it, that this is the first time you've heard it, and seeing what your thoughts are on it when you first learn about it. So we are just champing at the bit right now to start talking cases and get moving on to the next adventure, the next case. And we really hope that you guys enjoy this podcast and this process. I do think the debating back and forth when Maryn presents all of the additional information that she has found out about the case that didn't make it in, that are just the court of public opinion speaking, and then being able to compare that with, well, how does that line up with the evidence? And trying to explore, does our court system, the way that it's set up right now, does it work? is this finding people who don't know anything and go in, and the things that we don't let in for whatever reasons. The things that I don't understand is, for example, in the Lori Daybell case for Charles Vallow, there is body cam footage of Charles Vallow calling the police and telling them, my wife is going to kill me. She's trying to kill me. She thinks I'm possessed by this evil spirit, Ned Snyder. I'm really worried about my children. Well, guess what? She kills the kids. She kills him. Is that body cam footage in trial? No, because it's hearsay.
Yeah, the guy who died and thought the person who killed him might kill him, that's hearsay.
Right, exactly. So, it's things like that make me wonder, are there certain things that actually should be let in that aren't? And I do think that sometimes defense attorneys, they can push the boundaries to bring in things that really do affect the jury, prejudice the jury, that I think are just kind of throwing dirt to see what sticks and trying to confuse the jury in some way. And I think sometimes that leads to acquittals when it really should not be an acquittal. So
I also think that it's maybe on both sides. I don't have as much experience listening to court cases, but some either prosecutors or defense lawyers can kind of try to skirt around things by, you can say it can't be entered into evidence, but if I say it and the jury heard it and they say, okay, tell the jury, hey, don't consider that. Well, they've already heard it and we're human beings and they're gonna remember it.
100%.
That's what I think.
I think that is a strategy for sure, on both sides.
It makes me think of something very specific
that's coming up in this trial.
Yes.
That we're going to talk about.
But there are a lot of true crime podcasts out there, so hopefully you guys enjoy listening to a true crime podcast that has that kind of twist to it. It's certainly something that I've never seen or heard, and I'm just as interested to hear it live.
I'm really excited for this journey and invite you to come along with us.
Setup will be probably one episode a week. First episode of a case will be mostly from the court perspective, and I feel weird saying Christy, but I feel weird saying my mom. So my mom will discuss her experience listening to the court trial, and then we'll add in all of the extra information that was not admissible in the court of law.
Right. So,
and it will be interesting to see how often we agree and how often one of us sways the other and how often we end up hung ourselves.
100%. Thanks for listening. I'm Christy.
I'm Maryn.
And this is
Hung.